Coming up on this Wednesday edition of Daybreak, Typhoon Neoguri slams into Japan's southern islands, packing gusts of up to 250 kilometers per hour. A typhoon advisory has been issued on Korea's southern Jeju island. Korea's state auditor says April's ferry disaster was caused by government corruption and negligence. The Prime Minister vows to launch a national committee to root out wrongdoings and improve safety in the public and private sectors. Plus, more than a dozen Palestinians are killed in the Gaza Strip as Israel authorises the call-up of tens of thousands of reservists. Daybreak begins now.
Hello and thanks for joining us. To our viewers around the world, it's 6 a.m. on Wednesday, July 9th. Here in Seoul, I'm Mark Broom and you're tuned in to Daybreak. We begin this morning with a typhoon advisory for Korea's southern resort island of Jeju. This as Typhoon Neoguri is heading north from waters southwest of Okinawa. Officials say residents on Jeju should prepare for heavy rain, strong winds and high waves. The Korea Meteorological Administration says Jeju could see up to 200 millimeters of rain over the next 24 hours and wind gusts of up to 20 meters per second. Waves of up to 5 meters are also forecast. Neoguri is forecast to directly affect Jeju on this Wednesday and make landfall on Japan's Kyushu island on Thursday. Now, Typhoon Neoguri has already been releasing its grip on Japan's Okinawa. The storm has knocked out power to tens of thousands and forced many more to evacuate their homes. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
Typhoon Neoguri, billed as the strongest storm to ever strike Japan in the month of July, slammed into the Okinawa Islands on Tuesday. At least one person was killed when the boat he was on sunk in high waves. Over 500,000 people on the islands were urged to flee to safety, as the typhoon brought territorial rain and high winds, prompting authorities to issue emergency rain and high seas warnings. More than 50,000 households in Okinawa lost power. An oil refinery halted operations, and flights in and out of the area were diverted or grounded. Typhoon Neoguri weakened as it approached the island chain, and its initial status as a super typhoon was dropped. But winds remain intense, with gusts at times exceeding 250 kilometers per hour. The storm is now moving toward the island of Kyushu, where weather authorities are warning of heavy rains and potential flooding. While Okinawa has no nuclear power plants, Kyushu has 2, and Shikoku Island, also in the typhoon's path, has 1. All the nuclear plants have been shut down as safety precaution. A Japanese weather official says the effects of the storm will gradually make their way to Tokyo on Friday. By that time, the storm is expected to be much weaker, but people in the capital city can still expect a lot of rain. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
And we'll have more updates on the typhoon in our weather update in about 20 minutes' time. Now, in the rest of the day's news, the fallout from April's ferry disaster continues to dominate Korean politics nearly 3 months after that fateful day. The findings of the country's state auditor are likely to stir debate even further after it said Tuesday that lax government regulation, disaster control failure and corruption by some government officials contributed heavily to the accident. Park Ji-won reports.
It's around 3 p.m. on April 16th. About 6 hours after the Seoul ferry first encountered trouble. Officials from the Coast Guard and a rescue team communicate about the situation at the accident site. Rescue teams did not even have enough boats to take to the scene of the accident. These soundbites were made public during the ongoing parliamentary probe into the ferry disaster. They add credence to the criticism that authorities wasted precious time in the early hours of the accident because they weren't prepared. The Board of Audit and Inspection also found that information provided on a form submitted by the ferry operator to receive a navigation license for the Seoul ferry was altered, and that the local Maritime Affairs Administration failed to catch it. Cargo was also not reported properly. The ferry operator had reported that 97 vehicles were aboard the vessel that day, but in fact the number was nearly double that, at 185, another factor leading to the capsizing. Some Coast Guard officials stand accused of receiving kickbacks just days before a regulations committee convened to make a determination on the Seoul license. From corruption and lax oversight to failed rescue efforts, the combination of factors were deadly. Nearly 300 people have been confirmed dead in the tragedy, and 11 people remain unaccounted for. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Now, in the wake of the ferry disaster, Korea's Prime Minister has announced plans for a new committee aimed at radically reforming the country from the bottom all the way up. Our Chae-sun reports on how the group will include and draw upon the talent of civilians.
The government has put forth a new plan to have civilians take part in President Park's national reform drive.
Having the government and civilians take part in the National Reform Committee under the Prime Minister's office, I plan to establish a joint participation system.
In an address to the nation Tuesday, the Prime Minister said the committee will gather public opinion on reforms on ways to improve national safety and rooting out social corruption. This comes after President Park pledged sweeping reforms within the government and the public sector in response to April's deadly ferry disaster. Chung added the committee will mainly focus on bolstering public awareness and safety inspections.
After a thorough discussion at the committee, we will finalize a master plan on safety innovation, a blueprint for safer Korea by next February.
Vowing to set a framework for public reform within the month, the Prime Minister also urged the Parliament to support a swift passage of government restructuring and reform-related bills. A key part of President Park's restructuring plan includes establishing a safety ministry to oversee management of all forms of natural and man-made disasters. Prime Minister Chung, who was retained after he resigned to take responsibility for the government's lax response to the ferry accident, also promised the public that he would communicate better with the people as well as political parties and not hesitate in delivering public opinion to the president. Chae-sun, Arirang News.
Korea's Finance Minister Nominee Choi Kyung-hwan has promised all-out efforts to boost domestic demand to lead the economy out of its low-growth trap. In particular, the nominee says he wants to make it easier for home buyers to get mortgage loans from banks. Ji Myung-gil reports.
Finance Minister Nominee Choi Kyung-hwan says his initial focus will be removing red tape and other restrictions that make it difficult for consumers to buy a home. In his parliamentary confirmation hearing Tuesday, Choi said one area he will attend to urgently is easing what he called outdated restrictions on housing loans.
Debt-to-income and loan-to-value rules that have limited purchases have been in place for more than a decade, and there have been reasonable efforts to improve the system. We will come up with more reasonable measures.
Choi, who will also be a deputy prime minister if he is confirmed, said the government is requiring banks to excessively limit housing loans, as it has failed to change regulations written more than 10 years ago when there were worries about property market bubbles. Adopted during the housing market boom, the rules strictly restrict the size of a home loan that can be given to home buyers. But the nominee did not say how he would bring the nation's rapidly growing household debt problem under control. Critics say it will only get worse if loan restrictions are eased. Che said the need to boost domestic demand has become more urgent as the April ferry disaster prompted many consumers to refrain from leisure activities, thereby slowing the recovery.
The economic team will place its focus on boosting domestic demand through increasing household income and improving consumer sentiment.
The nominee also said he was opposed to tax hikes aimed at making up for a revenue shortfall, adding that revenue should be raised by boosting economic activities, not by raising taxes. Che said when it comes to extra budget, he said the government would take a comprehensive approach, looking into the economic conditions, and that the government is in the middle of crafting a budget plan for next year. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
We start before the sun rises to bring you the latest stories out of Korea. We also lead the way with important global coverage. Stay on the pulse of what is happening with Daybreak.
The Korean government carried out 70% of its regulatory reforms it planned to conduct in the first half of the year. The Ministry of Strategy and Finance said Tuesday it revised 19 out of 27 regulations, including easing restrictions on food trucks and increasing support for small and medium-sized enterprises dealing with chemicals. Regulations that still need work are removing blockages to the growth of SMEs and allowing the construction of manufacturing plants within complexes near harbours. The government plans to complete reforms on most of the regulations by the end of this month. Deregulation has been high on President Park Geun-hye's economic agenda in her efforts to spur business activities and corporate investment. Samsung Electronics issued its second quarter operating profit on Tuesday, and while the Korean tech giant once again pulled in some serious money, earnings were down across the board, showing that all is not well for the world's biggest smartphone maker. And Na Hyung-kyung reports.
Industry insiders in Seoul are calling it an earnings shock. Samsung Electronics' second quarter earnings guidance stands at 7.2 trillion won, or just above $7 billion, falling 15% from the previous quarter and down a whopping 25% from the same period last year. The company attributed the lower-than-expected operating profit to a slowdown in the growth of the global smartphone market and a strong Korean currency.
Samsung had a hard time in high-end smartphone segment because Galaxy S5 was not sold well. Second, Samsung did not focus on mid and low-end smartphone market because of price down pressure from Chinese smartphone competitors.
Experts add if Samsung fails to beat off competition from Apple and Chinese manufacturers such as Xiaomi and Lenovo by the end of the year, the results will take a toll on the Korean economy as well, given that Samsung last year took up nearly 50% of the combined net profit generated by all listed companies in Korea. Samsung says the far from impressive numbers are hardly related to its ill chairman Lee Gun-hee, but with the second quarter profit hitting a two-year low, investors are likely to put more pressure on the tech giant's management. Na Hyun-kyung, Arirang News.
Now, with Chinese President Xi Jinping's recent visit to Seoul and a slew of economic deals freshly signed, it would be fair to say that the economic relationship between South Korea and China has never looked better or been better. You only need to look at the numbers. Korea's two-way trade with China was well over $200 billion last year. This exceeds the combined value of Korea's trade with the US and Japan. Connie Kim reports on the rapidly expanding economic and business relationship.
Trade volume between South Korea and China is expected to reach a record high this year, and bilateral economic ties are only expected to strengthen moving forward. Trade between the two countries jumped 50-fold from 1992 to last year to $270 billion. China's past investments in Korea were limited to real estate and industries related to the Korean wave, but the landscape is changing. Beijing has diversified its investments into Korea's IT, service, and content sectors, providing a boost to the Korean market. Take Chinese investment company Tencent, for example. It promised in March to invest $523 million into Korea's CJ Games, far exceeding the amount of China said it would invest in Korea for the whole of last year, which was $480 million. However, it's not just these ties that will strengthen bilateral relations.
Experts say the two nations should now expand cooperation in the financial industry to further facilitate trade, investment, and other bilateral economic ties.
The biggest achievement with President Xi Jinping's visit to Seoul was pushing for economic cooperation between two countries. By allowing direct trading between the won and the yuan and allowing Korean companies to directly invest yuan in China's stock and fund market, it will create another yuan market that will facilitate bilateral cooperation.
And in the face of an influx of Chinese money and a bigger business presence in the country, experts say Korea must maintain its source technology and develop a competitive edge in the service industry. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Japan plans to use drones to boost its maritime surveillance capabilities to better respond to natural disasters and to improve security around remote islands. According to the Nikkei Shimbun on Tuesday, the Japanese government is looking to deploy 2 high-altitude, long-range drones to be used with an existing satellite-based monitoring system. The drones will cruise over designated areas above waters at an altitude greater than 15 kilometers. This is a height where they will be unaffected by weather and they'll be able to fly for up to 72 hours. The plan comes amid China's aggressive expansion of maritime presence and follows a series of intrusions by Chinese vessels into Japanese waters. Time now for a look through the international headlines we're following on this Wednesday morning. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim, standing by at the news center. Good morning, Eunice.
And good morning to you, Mark. Israel's offensive against Hamas-held Gaza has intensified. It struck more than 100 sites on Tuesday, killing at least 19 Palestinians. Palestinian medical officials say 3 children were among the dead. Dubbed Operation Protective Edge, the offensive sent rockets targeting the homes of several Hamas operatives. Israel's military said it also took out a Hamas command center inside a civilian building. The Palestinian Islamists threatened an earthquake in response. Late Tuesday, a pair of rockets were launched deep into the Israeli side, targeting its commercial capital of Tel Aviv. They were intercepted by an Israeli rocket defense system. In Jerusalem, residents took cover when air raid sirens went off. Israeli Cabinet Minister for Internal Security said a ground invasion into Gaza was possible in the operation that won't end in days. The presidential compound in Somalia was raided by al-Shabaab militants, bypassing the heavily fortified security. Militants detonated a car bomb near the entrance, then struck from 2 directions. Somali security officials say all the attackers have been killed. President Hassan Sheikh Mohammed was not at the compound at the time. A similar attack took place at the presidential palace in February, also by al-Shabaab. The Islamist group lost control of Somalia back in 2011. U.S. President Barack Obama has asked his Congress for $3.7 billion to deal with the humanitarian crisis of mass child migration from Central America. More than 50,000 undocumented children have arrived in the U.S. since October, in many cases fleeing violence back at home. The emergency immigration funds would be used in their transportation, detention, care, and the speedy deportation of adults with children, as well as boosting surveillance at the border. Officials at the UN are pushing for the immigrants to be treated as refugees displaced by armed conflict. The flood of illegal immigrants has caused a political firestorm in Washington as immigration resources are feared to run out soon. Scientists are getting closer to the day doctors can predict the onset of Alzheimer's disease by a simple blood test. The study identified 10 proteins in the blood that could be examined to make the diagnosis with an accuracy rate of 87%. The study looked at 1,000 test subjects and was published in the journal Alzheimer's and Dementia. The hope here is that identifying the disease earlier could pave the way for effective drugs to halt its progression.
And a good Wednesday morning to you all as we kick things off with the 2014 Brazil World Cup as the semifinals match began earlier today, starting off with the host nations Brazil and Germany. Let's take a look at the highlights so far. Now, of course, Brazil without their stars Neymar due to his injury and Thiago Silva after the yellow card accumulation as Germany quickly takes advantage as Thomas Müller scores off of a corner in the 11th minute as Germany goes up 1-0 early on. And then in the 23rd minute, Brazil defense collapses once again as Miroslav Klose sends one past Julio Cesar, breaking the record set by the Brazilian Ronaldo for the most overall goals in the World Cup. But we're not done yet. Toni Kroos scores shortly after once in the 24th and then again in the 26th, breaking it wide open with a 4-0 lead. 29th minute, Sami Khedira contributing to the German barrage 5-0. And currently in the second half, the score is still 5-0. And staying with football, this time with the South Korean striker Park Ju-young, who's been heavily criticized over his lack of form during the Brazil World Cup. Now, despite all that, he's still linked to a move to the Turkish Super League. Now, Bursaspor FC, who's been looking for a striker this summer, is currently in talks with the South Korean striker, according to several reports from Turkey. And this move is made possible with the fact that the current Bursaspor manager, Şenol Güneş, has managed Park Ju-young before when he coached FC Seoul from 2007 to 2009. Although the move has not been confirmed just yet, it's speculated that it will happen real soon. And now moving over to some Tuesday night KBO action, the Kia Tigers win one over the SK Wyverns 10-6 with the Samsung Lions shutting out the Lotte Giants 4-0. And the Nexen Heroes crushed the Hanwha Eagles 17-3 thanks to an 11-run third. You want to take a look at the highlights between the Tucson Bears and the LG Twins. And of course, going into the game here, Chung Soo-bin leaves off with a drive to deep right, gone a leadoff home run, giving the Tucson Bears the early 1-0 lead. Second inning of the game, Choi Jae-hoon, an RBI triple to right center. Kim Jae-ho scores, and it's 2-0 before Chung Soo-bin with an RBI bunt single, giving Tucson the 3-0 lead. But bottom of the inning, Chae Sung with an RBI single to left center cuts the deficit to 3-1 before Chae Kyung-chul at bat plunks one to right, making it 3-2. But in the third inning, Oh Jae-won increases Tucson's lead with an RBI single to right as Tucson takes a 4-2 lead. And if you thought that's all the offense for the night, wrong, because after 22 runs and 36 hits between the two teams, the Tucson Bears come out on top as they beat the LG Twins 14-8, your final score. And now finishing things off, but staying in the KBO, some good news for all you KBO fans who've been sick of all the blown calls by the umpires, because a video replay system might be used starting at the second half of the season. Now, with the directors of the 10 KBO teams meeting in Incheon on Tuesday, they've agreed to the league using the video replay system on safe or out, fair or foul, and catch or no catch calls that might have been miscalled by the umpires. While the managers of the KBO teams will also meet to finalize this new rule, once in effect, it will be implemented after the All-Star break. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day, and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Good morning. Well, the Typhoon Neoguri hit the Okinawa, Japan yesterday, and it's still heading to north to Kyushu, Japan, and will reach Kyushu, Japan tomorrow. And due to influence of typhoon, strong gusty winds and high waves are expected in the water south of Jeju Island. So the Typhoon Watch and Typhoon Advisor has been issued in the water south of Jeju, as it will be directly affected by the storm. And the whole peninsula will receive moderate to heavy heavy showers throughout the day, especially Jeju. We'll see up to 200 millimeters of rainfall, so please take the necessary precautions. But for the upper provinces, we'll continue to have those soupy weather conditions. Temperatures will hover over 30 degrees Celsius, and with the rain, it will feel quite humid. So please do keep that in mind. And here are the readings for today. The morning low here in Seoul is starting out at 25, then the high could rise to 33, while Daegu and Gwangju will have a daily high of 30 and 28, and Busan should make it to 27 this afternoon. Now for other regions, down on Jeju and Daejeon should see a high of 26 and 30, and Dokdo will reach 28. Well, please stay alert, and I'll be back with more updates after 10.
Thank you very much, Gian. And those are the stories we have for you at this hour. But Korea Today is coming up in half an hour's time. We'll be back at the same time on Thursday. Until then, goodbye.